I think it's very important to not treat women as a segment, because 50% of the planet cannot be treated as a segment and as an afterthought. So I think the real challenge for the financial industry is to put women back into the core of how they design their value chains and really ask themselves a very basic question. And the challenge is just asking it systematically across the value chain. Is what we are doing going to appeal to the women as much as it appeals to the men? Or do we need to tailor anything in our approach, in our dialogue, in our offering, in how we serve clients and how we serve female clients? And I always say, I think it has little to do with the offering. I don't think women need a whole array of new financial products, but I do think we need a different dialogue.
Welcome to episode 35 of the Innovating Advice Show. I'm joined by Dr. Mara Catherine Harvey, whose day job is as a senior manager at UBS Switzerland AG. She is also an international speaker, financial literacy expert, and author of a wonderful book series called A Smart Way to Start, which teaches kids the basics of money and finance and helps to empower young girls. In this episode, we discuss the shocking results of research that Mara has done around various financial risks that women face throughout their life and what financial services professionals can do to help reduce these risks. We also discuss Mara's financial literacy work, her book series, and why it's so important to counter the messages that young girls and women receive from the media, and even how financial services messaging can be harmful. Links and show notes at innovatingadvice.com/episode 35. You're listening to the Innovating Advice Show, and I'm your host, Kate Holmes, bringing you the global pulse on financial services innovation, featuring financial planners, financial advisors, and related professionals from all corners of the globe. Let's dive in. Hi, Mara. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And Mara, I saw a video on your LinkedIn of an interview that you did, and I was just fascinated. I was captivated by it. And you also had me cracking up because you were talking about how you were kind of sharing a lot of bad news, but there was also some good news. So we're going to be covering all of that and starting with a lot of what you were talking about there around all this research you have done on women and risk. So can you talk us through that?
Absolutely, with pleasure. So I started looking into the topic of women and risk a few years ago when I realized that actually women are engaging with the financial industry much less than men are. And I tried to understand the root causes behind that. And not only are there structural barriers that have got to do with the way the industry itself has evolved, the jargon of the industry, the fact that we often let people believe that they need to be technical experts before they can engage in finance. But more importantly, I came to the realization that money messages are extremely biased. The way we talk about money to men is very different from how we talk about money to women. And those biases start really early. And that influences materially how women perceive risk and how women engage in financial matters, especially long-term matters.
And so what would be an example of that sort of difference in language between men and women?
So there's research that was done, especially in the UK, on all of the media messages relating to money in all the magazines and publications and so on. And call it 80% of the messages targeting men had to do with, you're more of a man if you're making money, which you can argue is also very unfair to the men. But all of the majority of the messages, around 80% again, targeting women, had to do with spending money, and maybe you spend too much or you could optimize your spending. So extremely biased in the way we put women in the category of spenders and men in the category of earners.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things I know you touched on is the risk of women earning less than men and how that pans out throughout women's lifetimes.
Indeed. And that was possibly the piece of research that for us was most eye-opening and extremely sad indeed. So one day I actually asked our chief investment office, because I couldn't find any data on it. I said, so if I'm a woman And I'm a professional, and I've studied and I've had a professional career without too many interruptions, and I've always worked full time. But I know I have a pay gap, and let's assume we have a pay gap of 10% across your entire lifetime. How much less wealth would I end up with compared to a man? And they didn't have any data on this either, so they agreed to run a simulation on it. And they modeled, an indicative Joe and an indicative Jane and their lives and their earning patterns and saving patterns. And it turned out that just a 10% discrepancy in salary led to the Jane in the model accumulating roughly 40% less wealth.
Wow.
Which was absolutely shocking. Indeed, we thought the model was wrong, and they checked it for days until they realized the model isn't wrong. That is how big the magnitude of salary disparities is over a lifetime.
And was that with all other things being equal in terms of the amount that was put into a pension plan, saved over time, spent over time?
Yes, all the other assumptions were equal. And then we started looking at, so what if we factor in also all the other factors that impact women? So let's assume she takes a career break, maybe because of children. And let's assume that maybe after that career break, she can't go back full time. And let's assume that she's also going to live longer than the average man. And therefore, whatever she does accumulate has to last longer. And on top of that, let's assume, which is a very realistic assumption, that she has a lower risk appetite than a man, simply because precisely the engagement in financial matters is lower, and therefore the level of confidence and maybe ability to invest is slightly less developed. And even a small percentage difference in how you invest and the returns you make over decades, of course, has a massive impact. And the brutal reality of the model was that Jane would actually run out of money before she ran out of life.
Wow. Mara, that's devastating.
I know. And it was so sad to see this, even with rather benign assumptions, because, a 10% pay gap is far away from the reality and the average across many, many countries. And especially for certain ethnic groups, those gaps can be even 40%. So when you realize the long-term implications of pay gaps, it just puts the whole debate into a completely different perspectives. It raises the sense of urgency to resolve this from a societal and governmental perspective, because pension funds are not going to close the gaps.
Nope.
And it raises the sense of urgency from an individual angle to say we need to get the women far more aware of what they can do to optimize their finances in the long term.
So coming from a financial services perspective, financial planning perspective, what are some of the things that the industry and profession could be doing better to help women, given this information and knowing that we can't control everything, but what are some of the things we can control and support?
Exactly. Let's see. I would start by saying, I think every player in the financial industry first has to be aware of this problem and opportunity that it represents to better serve female clients. And by awareness, I mean, do companies even put a gender split on their figures? Do they know how many women and men they serve? Do they know how many assets of women they serve versus men? Do they map family members and ask themselves, for every man that we serve, do we serve the women as well? Do we have a dialogue with them? Are they at the table? Secondly, I think it's very important to not treat women as a segment, because 50% of the planet cannot be treated as a segment and as an afterthought.
Yep.
So I think the real challenge for the financial industry is to put women back into the core of how they design their value chains and really ask themselves a very basic question. And the challenge is just asking it systematically across the value chain. Is what we are doing going to appeal to the women as much as it appeals to the men? Or do we need to tailor anything in our approach, in our dialogue, in our offering, in how we serve clients and how we serve female clients? And I always say, I think it has little to do with the offering. I don't think women need a whole array of new financial products, but I do think we need a different dialogue.
Yes, Very different dialogue. And that was one of the other jaw-dropping things that I saw in that video you did, is you were talking about, thinking about women and risk. And I mean, you're not talking about risk tolerance. You're talking about almost the risk of being a woman in today's day and age, and some of the things that are actually not improving, which I was shocked by. And one of the things you looked at is how much of a woman's personal financial situation do they manage versus what do they abdicate to a man in their life to manage?
I wish we were making progress, but a lot of surveys that we have done, and of course this is surveys based on thousands of participants, certainly not representative necessarily of the entire population globally, but those surveys have demonstrated that the younger generation of women seem to be even less engaged in long-term financial matters than the older generations. And even there, the participation was barely between 50 and 60%. So for millennial women, that means that roughly half of the millennial women are still, call it, abdicating long-term financial decisions to their partners. And the good news is that women are very engaged in short-term financial decisions, in managing budgets, managing households, in earning, and they're professionally active. And so they're very involved with everything that's got to do with short-term finances, but not enough in long-term matters. And there is a clear opportunity for women to get more engaged, to understand what are the long-term consequences, what do I need? Also because, as some other authors in this area have put it very eloquently, a husband is not a financial plan.
Amen.
And I think that's something that really has to hit home, to say you cannot abdicate this. The brutal reality is that often women face the risk of inheriting twice, once from their parents and once from their spouses, because they might outlive their spouses. Now, why do I call that a risk rather than an opportunity? It's simply because very often they're not equipped with the skills to manage those situations. If they haven't been involved in financial matters all their lives, and then all of a sudden at an advanced age, your spouse passes away, well, there are lots of opportunities for things to go wrong. So it's much better to be prepared than to patch up the pieces later.
Yeah. So thinking first of millennial women, and then we'll talk about even younger than that. But I'm wondering have you noticed if there's an effect from the fact that we had the global financial crisis and a lack of trust in banks? Then what we've seen over the last 10 years, we're in another crisis now. Has any of that in your mind played a role in the lack of trust, I assume, in millennial women working with the financial services industry?
Mm-hmm. Look, this is, I would say, my best guess and interpretation based on anecdotal experience and not on research, strictly speaking. But I do believe that millennial women have been particularly affected by the aftermath of the financial crisis for the following reason. Trust in banks has basically fallen off the cliff. And women, more so than men, are very values driven. Yeah. We know that mostly when women engage with money, they would like to put their money to work in a way that is aligned with their values. And this is also true when deciding whether or not to engage with a financial institution. If that institution is not perceived as being aligned with their values and representing what is important to them, very often women would rather stay away from it than engage. You might argue, well, what about the men? They experience the same negative media messaging after the financial crisis. Why is it that the trust levels have not dropped? And again, that is something that maybe would require a little bit more research, but I think it has got to do with the fact that women really feel that unless the person I'm interacting with is somebody that I would deem trustworthy and an industry as a whole that I would deem trustworthy, I don't feel like engaging. And from the feedback that we've received firsthand from many women, they've simply said, look, it's just not fun. There's nothing entertaining or engaging about this. It's worse than going to the dentist.
Yep.
So if that's the case, we really have a lot of repositioning to do of the financial industry as a whole before broader audiences, younger audience will really feel like, I really should have a chat with my banker about this, and to even know who to talk to. That's maybe the other part of the problem. In an age where things become more and more digital, it becomes more difficult to actually have a person dedicated person to speak to. And that's also part of trust building.
Yes. Well, and you kind of hit the nail on the head. And I was thinking back to one of my clients when I started my practice years ago, and they were a married couple in their 20s, and my business was entirely virtual. So it was all about, building one-on-one connections virtually. Mm-hmm. And just the way I did it, using coaching and modular financial planning and leveraging technology so that they could see everything. I will never forget when we were interacting with their financial plan in real time, they both said, "Oh my gosh, this is fun. I never thought that financial planning could be fun." Brilliant. And I think that's one of those bright lights in terms of the evolution of financial planning and seeing these new business models coming out where you can actually serve the younger generation, serve the millennials that don't have the assets under management to manage. And if they do, it's probably in a pension plan. Probably don't need a lot of products sold to them, but they need that coaching. They need that engagement. And it absolutely can be fun. Not all of it. Certainly, there are some elements of going to the dentist, but as we're seeing these new models emerging and starting to change the conversation around what financial planning truly is, should be, and can be, it'll be interesting to see if that helps change some of the interactions that women are having and their views towards financial services.
I think it will, and I think we're seeing more and more players also try to disrupt the financial market space by offering models where the dialogue is more convenient, it's more tailored to your current situation, it's more understandable in terms of language, and it just feels like this is an easy place to go to ask hard questions.
Yep. And what are your thoughts on, I know one of the things that I feel like I always hear in conferences, and I'm still laughing, you said women are not a segment. That's so true. But there still seems to be some training that's needed around making sure when advisors and planners are meeting with clients, a man and a woman, that they're not only talking to the man, that mm-hmm. they are also talking to the woman.
Mm-hmm. We hear that again and again, and you'd really think, in 2020, we wouldn't have those stereotypes anymore. But very often women complain that if they're in a meeting, 80% of the eye contact is with their husband or their partner. And very often the assumption is that it is their partner's wealth, or he is the main breadwinner, and she is maybe also professionally active, but certainly not the main contributor to the family wealth. And very shockingly, when there are joint accounts, I have numerous interactions with women who say, I get a call from the client advisor who asks to speak to my husband, and it's about our joint account. And so I say, well, you can talk to me too. And the client advisor says, no, I'll call back when your husband is home. Oh. And so there really is this sense of disempowerment that is still there. And I think, yes, we do need to train wealth managers and private bankers and advisors across the entire spectrum just to say, don't assume, ask. And it's as simple as that. If you ask the couple in front of you, who wants to be engaged and how, in which conversations around managing the family wealth and planning for the long term, people will actually answer that question. And so you don't need to assume.
But should there be any flags if I think women can be in situations where the man has made it clear that they are going to manage the money. And even if mm-hmm. women have wanted to be involved, maybe they're not always given a voice within their own relationship. So I can see a situation where the woman might be timid and say, no, I don't need to be involved. But I think really it's our responsibility to make sure that both parties are equally involved in all of the decision making and knowing what's going on.
Exactly. I always say that also to my team members, right? If you delegate something, that doesn't mean that you're not responsible for the outcome.
Yep.
So if you do choose to delegate financial planning to your partner, well, you're just accountable for that outcome, whether you manage it yourself or not. So I think it's always wiser to at least know what the right questions are, what the right facts and figures are that you should at least review occasionally, even if you're not involved in every single decision. I think in any healthy relationship, there should be transparency. And if there isn't, maybe there are some other things that need to first be clarified.
Probably, yes, there often are. So, Mara, one of the other things you realized is really we need to be teaching women at a much younger age. And I mean way younger than I thought.
Yes. So all of my focus indeed over the years was on young professional women and adult women. And I stumbled across several pieces of research that indicated that confidence, first and foremost, so the confidence to engage in a topic, in anything at all, is actually shaped by the age of 5. And so I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting. Further research led me to realize that adult money habits are largely shaped already by the age of 7. And the worst news of all was when I realized that there is abundant research across multiple countries that shows that by the age of 10, girls often already face a pay gap between 10 and 30% in terms of pocket money.
Wow.
And that's where it all came together to say, we actually need to change the conversations around money that we have with children. And I'm talking little children, so primary school age, because if girls by the age of 10 are already subject to all of these biases, and we are already steering girls towards more unpaid chores than boys, all of the dynamics and stereotypes that we see in society and in the labor markets actually are mirrored one-on-one in society broadly and are mirrored at home. Even though no parent would ever intentionally discriminate against their daughters and say, I'm going to pay my daughter less than my son, or at least I don't believe I've encountered any people who have ever said they think that would be a good thing to do. But collectively, the girls are earning less. And we need to just raise awareness amongst the girls that, A, they should look at which chores they do. What is it they do get paid for? What is it they're doing for free? And if there are more chores to be done where you actually earn some extra pocket money, well, it's a good opportunity. It's a good learning curve. And most importantly, it's an opportunity to learn to negotiate. Because if girls learn to negotiate at home, it'll be so much easier once they enter the labor market to learn to negotiate their worth. And we don't teach girls to negotiate. Somehow it's still considered a little bit impolite to talk about money with children, let alone have them negotiate with you.
Yes. And goodness, thinking money habits by the age of 7, I don't think I have a single memory below the age of 7. I don't even know how does that happen? What about in families that don't ever talk about money? Is it just from society and almost subconsciously picking up messages everywhere we go?
It is, and that's the danger of it all, because today there are so many media messages around spending and credit card debt, and there are statistics as well that demonstrate how many young people are already indebted before they've even finished high school, and at a very young age, let alone when you start tackling student debt and the likes. So if people at a young age have not fully understood the dynamics of compound interest, how it works for you if you save and how it works against you if you borrow, there really are material risks that people just take it too lightly. Couple that with a low interest rate environment. When interest rates are higher, it becomes more tangible and more visible of what the long-term impact is. And often people think, oh, debt is so cheap, it doesn't really matter. But it's so important that those good habits are set early, because we're talking decades, we're talking retirement that will be decades. People no longer live only 2 or 3 years beyond retirement, like at the beginning of the previous century when pension funds were created.
Yep.
So we need to people to think in completely different terms and different long-term spans, lifespans. And those habits really need to start early so that they accompany you all your life. To start saving and thinking about retirement by the time you're 40 is 40 years too late.
Oh, wow. That's a powerful statement. So, Mara, in addition to seeing what the problems are, you're actually working on creating some of the solutions. So share with us about your A Smart Way book series for children.
Thank you, with pleasure. Indeed, I realized that we need to start the conversations much, much earlier than we were. And I also then tried to get on Amazon every single book on money for children that I could possibly find and get my hands on. And there are quite a few things out there that approach explaining money from different angles. But I couldn't find anything that I would have thought was like really fun, to come back to the fun topic.
Yeah.
And engaging, and something where a child and a parent would say, I want to read that book again. Not just read it once as information, as like a learning book, but something that you want to engage with again and again and again, and reflect on and use in a playful manner. And so I thought back at what did I enjoy most with my kids, and I realized that it was the rhymed books that I read the most. And you probably are familiar with books like Dr. Seuss and things like that. And I just thought, let's give ourselves the challenge. Let's write in rhymes. And it was actually triggered by a comment made by Shelley Tsalis, the CEO of the Female Quotient, who was moderating a panel with some amazing women that we had put together. And she basically said, oh, the places you'll go with financial confidence. And that is what made me go, yes, we need a book in rhyme on finance, on financial confidence for little girls and little boys, that just makes it fun to talk about money and to talk about earning and to talk about dreams and goals that you have and you need to save for, and to talk about the fact that there's no reason that a little girl should get a penny less than her big brother.
Yes.
So that's how the whole journey started. And yes, I had my daughter read book 1, and she was 12 at the time. And she read it and she said, oh, Mom, this is such a fun story, but I don't see the point. And I was like, what do you mean you don't see the point? It's like she grows up with, diversity for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and equality and pay gaps. And she was convinced that this problem was just a problem for my generation. She hadn't realized herself that this was a problem for her generation and the next generation, and foreseeably the next 7 generations, according to the World Economic Forum. So this is not good news. And so that's what made me then want to really take this little story that I had written and say, we have to find a way of carrying it out into the world.
Yes. And you're right. Those rhymes, they stick in your head. They can stick in your head for decades. I mean, think about how many silly things we remember from our childhood. And I'm pretty sure my favorite book as a kid was Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham.
Absolutely. Indeed. And so I must say my most favorite memory of the start of this journey in publishing the books was when a friend of mine who had bought the books for her niece sends me a photo with a little message saying, my niece wants to read the same book for the 4th night in a row. And I thought, yes, finally, something must be fun about it for her to want to read it for the 4th night in a row before she goes to bed. So that was the objective. Make it fun, make it easy, make it engaging.
And it is beautiful. Those illustrations are stunning.
Oh, thank you. I must say, I adore my illustrator. She is so very talented. And she is indeed now doing a master's in children book illustrations to further perfect her technique. And it's been an amazing collaboration together with her. It's really great.
Yes. So how many books are in the series now? And do you plan to continue expanding the series?
Currently, there are 4 books in the series. 4 physical books, and they are on earning, saving, spending, and making smart choices. Because I decided that if we're going to teach children about money, we might as well teach them about sustainability upfront as well. That every single money choice you're making impacts this world, so you have a choice to steer where your money goes. And there is also in the series a digital book, which is actually the ending of book 3 on spending, because it talks about spending digital money and how easy it is with a swipe or a tap for that money to be gone, but it still takes the same amount of time to earn. And because you can't touch digital money, we decided that you can't touch the book on digital money either. So it's an ebook only. Yeah.
Love it.
And the next book is in the making. As we speak, it's being illustrated. Book 5 is going to be called A Smart Way to Start Doing Good. So Start Doing Good with the acronym SDG, and it is all about the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations.
Wonderful. And what a great time for these books right now to be getting in the hands of children all over the world when kids are out of school and parents are looking for how can they teach their kids new things. Like I said, beautiful books. The physical books then, are those, I assume they can be shipped anywhere in the world?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're available off our own website, but they are also available on Amazon if that is more convenient for certain countries to have them delivered locally. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. So those links are in the show notes. So I would encourage everyone, if you are a parent yourself, get them for your kids, all the advisors out there. What a fantastic present to get your clients, whether it's for their grandkids or their children. I mean, what a thoughtful, wonderful gift. I would love to see these everywhere.
Oh, thank you so much.
So Mara, you also just touched on sustainability. So
indeed,
share with us the importance of sustainability and some of what that looks like in practice.
So starting with children, precisely, I thought that we have a fantastic opportunity to raise so much awareness for the fact that every single money decision, every single day has an impact on our world. Whether you're buying a sweetie or an ice cream or a t-shirt, do you know where it's made? Do you know where it comes from? To spark the curiosity that children naturally have to ask questions, and for children to learn and to realize that all of these products, all of these services imply production chains, imply people, imply materials that are being used. And to start thinking about that, of course, in child-friendly language, about, is child labor involved? Would you want to buy a product where another child couldn't go to school because they had to work instead? Would you want to buy a product that is damaging our forests or our oceans? Or if you could choose, wouldn't you want to know where that product comes from and how it's made? And for me, this was a way of articulating for children a topic that is so important in the financial industry overall, and that is the whole topic of sustainable and impact investing. Because the reality is that we are moving trillions of wealth on a daily basis. And if every single one of those decisions were taken more mindfully about which companies are we actually investing in, who's getting all of this money that is circulating every day, is it going towards companies that really care about improving their carbon footprint or their environmental impact or reducing the use of virgin plastics and so on. All of these decisions really matter. And I just think that as investors and as consumers, we have so much power in our hands to change that. But it's up to us to ask the right questions. Otherwise, that change won't happen at the pace it needs to.
Yes. Yeah, you're so right. And thinking about, the child that might be the consumer of these versus the child that might be making some of these things, talk us through kind of the need for true equality in the world and some of those steps we can take.
Exactly. I think that it really is about creating awareness for every single decision is going to have an impact, whether that impact is local to us or whether that impact is more global across supply chains, value chains, across the globe, across different countries. I think it is important that even children can understand those concepts and understand that sometimes if you're buying something that is really cheap, it might not have been produced in the most sustainable manner. And shortcuts are never good in life. It always comes back to bite you one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I think those are important messages also for children. And around that, the whole notion of equality, equal opportunity, and to make choices where if we want fairness, we need to be the drivers of those choices. We need to engage not only all of the girls in the conversation around equal pay and equality. We need all the boys engaged in that conversation as well. And just like my daughter was oblivious to the fact that this would be a problem of her generation, because she grows up thinking, but of course I'm equal to all of the boys. I mean, at school, there's no difference between us. And yet you realize when you enter the labor market that the differences are there. I think the same way we need to raise awareness amongst the boys that no, the world isn't equal for everybody, and you play an important role in making the world more equal with the choices that you make too. So I think it's at every level that we have an opportunity to shift the conversations, and we can start with children, and ideally that should accompany them throughout their lives. And as adults, as investors, as stewards of our families, of our futures, we need to be more mindful about this.
We do, absolutely. And speaking of kind of with your daughter and thinking everything is equal, I absolutely wish that it was, but still in 2020, women continue to have a lot of disadvantages in the workplace. So what are some of those key challenges that unfortunately still exist?
Oh, there are many of them. I think it really first and foremost does start with the fact that women don't value themselves as highly as men value themselves. There's also research on that. If you ask graduates or MBA students how much they think they should earn in their first job, the men will systematically answer more than the women will.
Yep.
So it is about first having that confidence of knowing your value, negotiating your value. Once in the labor force, women often tend to be promoted based on performance, whereas men often get promoted based on potential. And you do see that again and again, because again, it is a question of confidence. Men will raise their hand for a new job opportunity, even if they've never done it before. They don't really have a clue, but they're confident that they're going to figure out how to do that. And this is great, and what a lovely opportunity. And the women tend to first think about, okay, do I have experience? Have I done this before? Can I prove that I'm capable? And so on and so forth before they even raise their hand.
Yep.
And a lot has been written about this by people who have researched it far and wide, but it is true that these are also patterns that I see on a daily basis within the financial industry. Women, I think, are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So they get tons and tons and tons of advice, but not enough people in power that actually make opportunities come to life. Yep. And we need more of that. We need more tangible, let's make this happen attitude.
We do. And I have to say, it is just infuriating to me to know that you're right. Women get promoted based on performance and men get promoted based on potential. And there's so much that's ingrained in all of those messages that we get throughout life that's still causing that. And that's been a continuing conversation I've had recently that has been fascinating. Even people that are, outwardly advocates of women and say that they're providing those opportunities and not just mentoring, but sponsoring. But when you actually dig into the research and look at some of those studies, it is wild. How can we control some of those biases that so many of us don't even realize we have?
These biases indeed go back in history because traditionally leaders were male. And so our subliminal, subconscious, traditional perception of what leadership looks like and feels like and should be like has a strongly male connotation. And I think it will take generations for that to really shift towards a more egalitarian one. And in the meanwhile, I think the only way forwards is organizations need to set objectives for themselves and hold themselves accountable to making them come to life. Because I hear all too often people who say, but we can't find enough women. And I just feel like, I'm sure we can. I think we just have to look a little bit harder. There's no shortage of female talent. There might be a question of how much flexibility can those female talents offer in a context where daycare infrastructure is sometimes lacking, to the point that, working part-time is not a choice, but it really is just a necessity because you can't reconcile everything under one roof otherwise. But even so, if you want to drive forwards equality, there are ways to drive forwards equality. It is only a question of whether we really want it or whether we're willing to compromise.
Yes. Well, and I'll say, and I've shared this on the podcast before, one of the reasons I am committed to having 50% of my women as guests is because I know there are so many amazing women out there like you that are doing great things that I think are wonderfully inspiring to other women and the things you've accomplished. But I've realized it does come back a lot to that confidence issue. And it has been harder for me to find women out there. And when I have, sometimes they're, they don't think that they've accomplished enough to be featured on a podcast and they just don't have that confidence in there. But it's made me that much more committed to it because they are. And hopefully it is one of those sponsoring opportunities to say, yes, you can do it and let's get you out there. But you're right. Sometimes it does take a little more effort, but there are incredible women out there doing incredible things. And I think we all, men and women, need to be lifting them up and lifting each other up.
I couldn't agree more. And I'm really thankful for the fact that for you, this is a priority and it's something that you're focusing on. And my cat has inevitably decided that he wants to join the video as well.
Isn't that one of the beauties of being
Internet
remote?
And cats, absolutely.
I love it. It brings out the human side of everyone. Wonderful. Well, Mara, as we kind of wrap up here, any additional thoughts on all the research you've done on what's going on in the world right now with the pandemic and what the future might look like?
I think the important thing is just to try and spread the word as much as possible, to try to engage as many women and girls in these conversations as we possibly can. And I think everybody has a role to play, whether you are an adult, whether you are young yourself, whether you have children or don't have children. But certainly there are other members of the community, of your society, of your family that you can engage in better money conversations, and making it more friendly, making it more accessible, making it less of a taboo and something that people feel like it's great to have conversations about, I think is the only way to move forwards.
Yes. Well, and I love how you touched on earlier how kids are always asking questions. And I love that in kids. And I don't know when or how so many of us lose that as we get older, but I think it would be good for all of us to bring a lot of that back. Let's keep asking questions and being curious. And I think that allows more open conversations about things as well.
I think so too.
Wonderful. Well, I will link to the website for the A Smart Way book series. I'll link to your LinkedIn because there's a lot of great stuff on there. And Mara, thank you so much for your time, for everything you're doing, the research, the book series. I know you've got a lot of other great things in the works. So I would love to have you back on the show as you continue building out all these wonderful resources.
Thank you so much, Kate. And it was my pleasure entirely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Innovating Advice Show. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so make sure to connect with me on LinkedIn and shoot me a thought or two. Link to my profile is right below. Stay safe, stay well, and I look forward to hearing from you.